One of the coolest things about the Warhammer hobby is meeting other people who are into the Warhammer hobby, and one of the biggest hobby heroes I've ever met is the owner of Cobalt Keep, maker of the finest Warhammer bases west of the Rockies, and he has entrusted me with his favorite model of all time, the legendary Green Knight from the glory days of Warhammer Fantasy Battles in its original cardboard. It even smells old. On the back of the box, it has some very basic assembly instructions, along with a painting guide. And I don't want to say the heavy metal team was lying per se, but I see a lot more than 7 paints on this box art. Cracking the seal on this mini, he's done up in glorious white metal and very detailed. The clothing on his horse is especially intricate. To knock off any mold release agent and 30 years of dust, I gave the parts a bath in my ultrasonic cleaner. Pro tip, I found this wire ladle at a local grocery store. It's perfect for helping me get the parts in and out of the cleaner with no mess and no fuss. After the parts were clean, I cut off the sprues and did some fixing. Metal models are tricky to look at. It's hard to tell what's an imperfection and what's part of the sculpt, so I went slow and steady looking for every part and using my sanding twigs to perfect everything. The biggest hurdle was the 2 halves of the horse. They didn't line up together all that well, so I wrapped it in a lot of paper towel and put them in some vice clamps, squeezing, deforming the metal so that I had a tight seal on these parts. I also sanded his butt to make sure he fits snugly on his horse. For the big connection between the 2 halves of the horse, there is a lot of heavy metal that would be too heavy for super glue, so I mixed up some generic 2-part epoxy. My favorite epoxy is JB Quickwell, but I've used so much of it that my local hardware stores are sold out and they're taking their sweet time restocking. With the 2 halves stuck together, there's still a little gap, so to fill this, I poured some super glue and sprinkled on some baking soda. This soaks into the baking soda and dries instantly, making a hard resin-like material that I sanded flat. I put the rest of the minis together with thick super glue. There is a never-ending debate what makes the best minis, plastic, resin, or metal. I prefer plastic, but between resin and metal, I might prefer metal. It's hard to work with, but it can be perfected with effort, where resin sometimes can be a losing fight against a brittle model. I squirted a healthy dollop of thick super glue onto his butt and then sat him down on his horse. The thick super glue helps to fill in the gaps and imperfections in the metal and gives me the best possible connection. Now for his face. The Green Knight is a mythical figure, seemingly eternal and immortal, so I decided to fill in the holes in his helmet so you can't see any part of his face. It makes him more mysterious. Who knows what's happening under that helmet? And it feels good to use green stuff on the Green Knight. Now to connect him to his horsey. This will require a pin. White metal is soft enough that it can be drilled into if you go nice and slow, and I drilled a hole big enough that I can slide a paper clip into it. This will help a lot, making sure he never falls off of his horse. Pinning is a pain to do, but it's important for big metal models. There's a reason that before his plastic model, the old metal Abaddon was called Abaddon the Armless. Those arms would always fall off. After I got my guy stuck down, I put a little green stuff into his waist to smooth the gap, and I put a little onto the small of his back for his flagpoles. Now he's nearly complete, but unfortunately his original shield has been lost to time, so I need to make a new one. I drew out the shape of his shield onto some cardstock and roughly cut it out with some scissors for the big cuts, and then my sprue nippers to get rid of the excess plastic. Then I perfected it using my nail file to sand down the sides. I gave the shield a few seconds under a heat gun and then pressed it around the handle of my dry brush to give it a curved shape. A little ball of green stuff later and you would never know this isn't the shield he came with. Now, the Green Knight is built. Whew, I am really glad that modern minis are not all made out of metal. This guy was tricky, but now that I've got the mysterious Green Knight all built, he needs a base. I've got the classic Games Workshop base, but in Old World, the base size has increased a little bit. And so I have just the thing, courtesy of today's sponsor, Cobalt Keep. Cobalt Keep makes the highest quality wargaming bases around. Using more plastic than other manufacturers, their bases have a solid, robust feel. And as if being the best wasn't enough, they also have magnet slots built into each base so you can magnetize your minis perfectly with no guesswork. And they work perfectly on Cobalt Keep painting handles. The majority of my Warhammer army stand proudly on Cobalt Keep bases, which is easy as they have all the sizes you could need. From the tiny 25mm to the massive 170mm oval, and this massive variety also includes square bases for classic wargaming enjoyers. New and returning Warhammer Fantasy fans can have whatever they need, whether it's the classic 20mm square to add to an existing army while keeping things consistent, or the new larger 25mm base, Cobalt Keep has you covered. And as well as the rank and file sizes, Cobalt Keep also has the 25x50 cavalry, 50x50 squares, and the monstrous 50x100mm base size, so no matter whatever you're basing, Cobalt Keep has you covered. Shop with the code EOB10 to get 10% off your order of the best wargaming bases from Cobalt Keep. A big thanks to Cobalt Keep for sponsoring this video and letting me experience a little bit of classic Warhammer Fantasy Battles nostalgia. I've got the Green Knight, I've got the base, and I want to do something a little special for this guy. He is one of the most legendary characters in all of Fantasy Battles. So I've got this Cobalt Keep cavalry display case. Keyword, cavalry. I'm not one for dioramas. They're fun to make, but I don't like them cluttering up my house. However, this is going to a friend, so I get to have the fun of building the diorama and it can clutter up his house. I measured out the footprint of the case and then transferred this onto some foam core board. This will be the walls of my diorama. Pro tip for invisible seams, trace out the edge of the foam core with another piece of foam in front of it to get the width of the foam. Then carefully cut through one layer of paper and foam and then cut through the foam from the side so that you're left with just the paper sticking out the exact width of the sheet. Then I poured some hot glue and squished my pieces together, giving me an invisible seam. I did this on all 4 sides and then traced it out on some pink foam, and I cut this out and then sunk it into my foam core. Then I traced out the slope of my hillside and I replaced the foam and traced out my sides, carving the foam to match. I hot glued the pink foam into the foam core board permanently and then figured out where I want my green knight, tracing out the edge of his base and carving away a wedge so that he has room to slide into. I used my Dremel tool to clean up the edges, and as much as I love dioramas, I can never forgive myself if I didn't make this mini game legal, so I put a scrap piece of metal under his base so that the Cobalt Keep Matic can hold him down. But he'll still be able to be pulled out of the diorama for gaming. Now that I know where Green Knight will be, I carved up the base with my Dremel tool and started to decorate it, gluing down some pine bark nuggets to make some rocky outcroppings. And I used playing cards to toughen up the edge of the foam around where the Green Knight's base will be. I've got the bases of my landscape and it's time to smooth it out, and for this I'm going to use Duraham's water putty. You can find this on dusty shelves in the back of hardware stores. It's actually great stuff. You mix it with water and it makes a putty with a 10-minute work time, and I spread it using my fingers and a disposable paintbrush to make everything nice and smooth. Once it was dry, I did a little more sanding and decided to add some trees. I cut these up and hot glued them down to the putty, then blending them into the base with some milliput, and I pressed in texture to the putty with a damp paintbrush. Then I added some boulders using fish tank rocks, hollowed out the tree stumps, and sprinkled sand and coconut husk all over the ground. And that is my beautiful wooded scene. To make the Green Knight match, I built up his base with some green stuff. Green stuff dries rubbery, so hopefully this will hold him down more tenaciously. Then I used milliput to make the base match the slope of the diorama, finishing it off with some pine bark nuggets. I snapped him into position and he looks right at home. Cobalt kept in a Cobalt case. Now there's only one thing missing, and that is some banners on the end of his flagpoles. To make some flags, I cut up a soda can for the thin aluminum. I can bend this and it'll keep its shape, but paint won't stick to it very well. So to fix this, I used some name tag stickers, cutting them to match the shape of my banners. This will give the paint something to hold on to. I crimped these and hooked them around the poles, locking them into position with super glue and bending them to make them flapping in the breeze. Holy cow, I always forget how long it takes to build models, but this guy is done and he fits perfectly into his little French forest. And speaking of forests, I've been doing a ton of forests lately. Don't tell nobody, but I've been working on my Sylvaneth army. Now that this guy is all built, it is time for the fun part, the good part, the painting. The Green Knight is no ordinary knight. He's a magical knight, the guardian of the Lady of the Lake, and I want to give him a paint job that matches. I primed him in black and then sprayed him with a dark purple paint, then doing a minty green zenithal from above. As nice as the heavy metal paint job looks, he kinda looks like a normal guy, albeit a fancy guy, but he doesn't scream Ghost Knight. Now that I have my ghostly colors down, I do want to try and replicate all the fancy embroidery on his cloak. I took a warm white color and loaded up a sharp brush with long bristles and went to town on the mini. I'm not too worried if this isn't perfect. There's going to be a lot of layers over top of this. I picked out the reins, doing stripes over the fabric, and did half his shield and clothing in the warm white color. And I covered the horse and rider in silly putty so I could spray this color onto the banners to brighten them up. And I used up what was left in my airbrush to highlight the base. I took some metallic silver speed paint and put this over the metal armor and washed it with a purple, using this to outline all the details on him. I gave him a dry brushing of warm white to bring out all the details in his flowing cloth, and now it's time for the juice. All of this has just been the base coating. I put neon green into my airbrush and dusted this all over the mini. Over the purple, it turns into a dark saturated black, and over the warm white, it turns into a spooky neon glow. Now, I can finish him up. For him and his horsey's fancy hair pieces, I dry brushed these with my warm white and gave them a coat of speed paint green. And over his horse's parts, I put black speed paint. I dry brushed some silver over his metal parts and blacked out his face, adding in some glowing eyes that I matched on his horse. These glowing eyes are the last thing seen by a lot of orcs and goblins. I picked out the fleur-de-lis on his chest, and this gave me an idea for his shield. I kind of forgot about the shield, but the split-tone shield is a little boring. But a split-tone fleur-de-lis, now that's something. For his vengeful sword, I used black and warm white to make a gradient blending in the middle and doing edge highlights, and glazing a green paint to give it a ghostly glow. His sword glitters like an emerald. And I put the same speed paint ghillie-doo I used on his feathers onto his banners. I'm not much for historical wargaming, and this is my first experience painting just a regular dude on a horse, but I had fun with it. I think part of the reason why I had fun with it is because he's not quite just a dude on a horse, or at least I didn't make him just a dude on a horse. If I look at the box art, this is kind of just a guy on a horse, but I used exclusively green colors to give him like a ghostly presence. He is a supernatural knight. He's the final boss for Bretonnian knights who want to become Grail knights, and he is the guardian of the Lady of the Lake. And speaking of the Lady of the Lake, I gotta get the rest of this diorama done. I plopped down the Green Knight and airbrushed some red-brown over his base and the diorama floor. Then gray paint over the rocks, and I put some light gray paint and turned the PSI way down on my compressor to do some splatter painting over the rocks and boulders. I made up a dark brown wash and gave the entire diorama a wash, then some Agros earth shade on the tree trunks. I did a dry brushing of white paint on the rocks and an earth brown dry brush over the trees. Now, to try something new, dirted down moss. I gave it a go, loading it up onto a ratty paintbrush and using a toothpick to bend the bristles, letting them snap back, splattering this paint over the base. It looks pretty good. It's a very matte transparent green color and it dries with some nice variety. Now to get tufting. I took all my natural looking tufts and mixed them and applied them liberally all over the base. Then to help blend everything together, I dusted a little bit more neon green over the middle of the diorama to tint the ground and the tufts closer together in hue. And then I put burnt sienna over the perimeter to darken it and make a subtle vignette so the eye is drawn to the Green Knight. Now I have this hole in the bottom of the base, and this is a multi-purpose hole. I held my airbrush under the diorama and sprayed up through the hole to make some object source lighting, spraying white for a base coat and then neon green to tint it. I want this to be a magical pool of water, and this hole will let me use my airbrush and it'll give me a nice flat pool. For something flat, I used a playing card, base coating it in green and then holding it under the base so I can make a dot so I can see right where the center is. Then I painted a ripply green pool. I glued down the playing card with some tacky glue and then filled up the hole with a thin layer of UV cure resin. After a few minutes under my lamp, the resin was rock hard, and so is our website. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find our merch like our new Nick and Jay dice, and the best way to support us doing what we do with a membership. Each month, members will get a credit that they can use on our new monthly terrain pack or any previous pack we have ever made. This month, our new terrain is the Clone Expansion, a part 2 to our spaceship interior, with new wall sections for building out the grisly facilities of a cloning laboratory, complete with examination/autopsy tables, cloning bays, and new doors. And the cloning doesn't stop there. The cloning towers are macabre monoliths drooping with pods full of fresh recruits or test subjects depending on the needs of the mad scientists who operate them. With the resin cured, I put a little bit of Vallejo water texture, giving it a blast with my airbrush to make it look like it's bubbling and splashing out from the center. The diorama is nearly complete. I painted the edge with some gloss black paint and then stuck it all down to the floor of the display case with some double stick tape. Putting the cover over top was a magical moment. Cobalt Keep recommended turning this Green Knight into a diorama, and I don't really do dioramas. It's not that I don't like dioramas, they're actually really fun to build, but I don't like to have dioramas. I really like toys, and this guy is a really cool toy, but he's trapped in there, I can't get at him. But there is something to it. This is an absolutely lovely object, and it's time to get this lovely object to its rightful owner.
Hello folks, this is Ashton from Cobalt Keep. I got a package here from my good friends over at Eons of Battle. Okay, here we go. Almost like Christmas. A lot more in here than I was expecting. I don't know what to open first. Oh, these are, oh yeah, Eons of Battle post about these. These are their dice sets. Oh yeah, that's very nice. Okay, we're gonna open up this. I believe this is the diorama that the Green Knight goes into. Oh man, I can already see it. It looks so good. Whoa. Whoa. Look at that. Holy, whoa. Holy cat. Oh my goodness. That is 100% the nicest model that I own. I mean, it's unbelievable for me. Wow. Look at it, it fits perfectly. A work of art. Before I even knew what Warhammer was, I was just this, at the time, 13 to 14-year-old kid trying too hard to be cool. I was walking around downtown with my mom and my little brother, and I looked to my right and there's this big shop with this big glass window. And right at my eye level was this guy. And so we went into the store and kind of encountered the world of miniatures and hobby painting. And I found the box of the Green Knight and I was like, Mom, I need this, like, let me have it. And she looked she looked right at the price tag. You know, back then it was probably like 15, 20 bucks. And she's like, no, that's ridiculous for one tiny little model. You can't have that. And so a few years ago, for some reason on my eBay list, just all of a sudden this model was recommended to me, the Green Knight. And you know, that was before Old World. So it was just this model that was just randomly recommended to me, and it had the same impact on me. I saw it and I was like, that's the guy, that's the Green Knight, that's the model that just started this obsession for me. all those years ago that I grew up and forgot about, and now I had big boy bucks, so I bought it. And since I've collected, a few more, just a couple more. There's probably 2 more laying around in a box somewhere. But it's just my favorite model that's ever been made. But I just love it. And Jay did an amazing job with this. I mean, better than I could ever imagine it would come out to be. And look, oh, he's on the new Cobalt Key base, the new size for Warhammer Old World. Fits nicely, and he just slides right in there. Oh, so nice. This is going on my shelf. I have a shelf over here in Cobalt Keep where I put all the best stuff, and this is definitely going front and center. Lock it into his base to protect it. No dust on this baby. Look at that. Beautiful diorama.